Erik Thorstvedt holds aloft the FA Cup during Tottenham's trophy parade after their victory over Nottingham Forest in the 1991 FA Cup final. Tottenham Hotspur are one of England's biggest clubs. Spurs have history, tradition, a strong fan base and, as of 2019, one of the finest stadiums in world football. And they have recent bragging rights, too, having lifted the Europa League trophy in an all-English final, stand a 17-year trophy drought and deliver on Ange Postecoglou's now iconic claim that he always wins in his second season. Not including second division titles, the Charity Shield or the Anglo-Italian Cup, here is a look at all of Tottenham's major trophy wins over the years. FA Cup, 1901. Tottenham's 1901 FA Cup winning team posed with the Sheriff of London shield after beating Corinthians in 1902. Tottenham Hotspur won the FA Cup in 1901 to become the first team from outside the Football League to take the trophy. Spurs beat Sheffield United 3-1 in a replay after the first match ended 2-2, starting a tradition of the Lily Whites winning silverware when the year ended in the number 1. FA Cup, 1920-21. Tottenham squad posed with the FA Cup and the Charity Shield in 1921. 2 decades after their first FA Cup win, Tottenham beat Wolves 1-0 at Chelsea's Stamford Bridge home to claim the trophy for a second time. Jimmy Dimmick scored the game's only goal, 8 minutes into the second half, and Spurs represented the trophy by King George V. The best features, fun and footballing quizzes, straight to your inbox every week. First Division, 1950-51. Tottenham Hotspur, 1950-51 First Division champions, pictured in August 1951. Tottenham's maiden league title came in 1950-51 as Arthur Rose pushed in a run side finished 4 points clear of Manchester United at the top of the First Division. Spurs, promoted the previous season, won 25 and drew 10 of their 42 fixtures to take the title. The squad featured 2 players who would become legendary managers, Alf Ramsey with England and Bill Nicholson at Tottenham. First Division, 1960-61. Tottenham players posed for a group photograph during a training session at White Hart Lane in March 1961. Tottenham won 31 of their 42 First Division games in 1960-61, including the first 11 fixtures of the season, to win the title for a second time. Spurs finished 8 points ahead of Sheffield Wednesday and qualified for the European Cup for the first time. Bill Nicholson's side netted 115 goals in the competition and striker Bobby Smith finished as the league's top scorer with 28. FA Cup, 1960-61. Tottenham Hotspur players posed with the First Division and FA Cup trophies after winning the double in 1960-61. After winning the First Division title in 1960-61, Tottenham went on to complete a double by beating Leicester City in the FA Cup final at Wembley in May 1961. Bobby Smith and Terry Dyson scored second-half goals as Spurs ran out 2-0 winners in front of 100,000 fans at Wembley. FA Cup, 1961-62. Tottenham players celebrate with the FA Cup after beating Burnley 3-1 in the 1962 final at Wembley. Strengthened by the arrival of Jimmy Greaves from AC Milan in December 1961, Tottenham challenged on 3 fronts in the 1961-62 season. Spurs eventually finished third in the First Division and were controversially beaten by Benfica in the European Cup semi-finals, but the Lily Whites did retain the FA Cup. Greaves opened the scoring in a win over Burnley at Wembley, with Bobby Smith adding another and a penalty from Danny Blanchflower sealing a 3-1 victory. UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, 1962-63. Tottenham squad poses with the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup in 1963. Tottenham tasted continental success in the 1962-63 season, becoming the first English club to win a major European trophy. Spurs thrashed Atletico Madrid 5-1 in the final in Rotterdam, with Jimmy Greaves and Terry Dyson both on target twice and John White getting the other one. FA Cup, 1966-67. Tottenham players celebrate with the FA Cup after a 2-1 win over Chelsea at Wembley in the 1967 final. Tottenham won the FA Cup for a 5th time in 1967, beating Chelsea 2-1 in the final at Wembley. Jimmy Robertson and Frank Saul scored the goals for Bill Nicholson's side, with Bobby Tambling pulling one back for the Blues late in the game. It was the first FA Cup final to feature 2 London clubs. League Cup, 1970-71. Tottenham players celebrate their League Cup final win over Aston Villa in February 1971. One of several teams that declined to take part in the early editions of the League Cup, Tottenham won the competition for the first time in the 1970-71 season. Spurs beat Aston Villa, a third-tier team at the time, 2-0 at Wembley as Martin Chivers scored twice late in the game. UEFA Cup, 1971-72. Tottenham captain Alan Mullery sits on the shoulders of his teammates as he holds the UEFA Cup after Spurs win in the final against Wolves in May 1972. The UEFA Cup started life in the 1971-72 season and Tottenham Hotspur were the inaugural winners of the competition. Spurs beat Wolves 3-2 on aggregate, with Martin Chivers netting both goals in a 2-1 win at Molineux and Alan Mullery on target in a 1-1 draw in the second leg at White Hart Lane. League Cup, 1972-73. Tottenham players celebrate after victory over Norwich City in the 1973 League Cup final. Tottenham returned to the League Cup final in 1973 and took the trophy again after beating Norwich City at Wembley. Substitute Ralph Coates scored the game's only goal after 72 minutes, and in the League Cup's 13th edition, Spurs became the first club to win it twice. FA Cup, 1980-81. Glenn Hoddle and Ricky Villa celebrate with the FA Cup after Tottenham's win over Manchester City in a replay in the 1981 final. Image credit, Getty Images. Tottenham beat Manchester City in a replay to win the 100th edition of the FA Cup in May 1981. After a 1-1 draw in the first match at Wembley, Spurs and City met again at Wembley 5 days later in a match remembered for Ricky Villa's stunning solo goal. The Argentine scored twice, with Garth Crooks also on target in a 3-2 win for Keith Birkinshaw's side. FA Cup, 1981-82. Tottenham players celebrate with the FA Cup after victory over QPR in the 1982 final at Wembley. Tottenham retained the FA Cup in the 1981-82 season, but needed a replay once again to get the job done. The first match against Queen's Park Rangers finished goalless after 90 minutes and 1-1 following a period of extra time. Glenn Hoddle, who had scored Spurs' goal in that game, netted a penalty in the replay as a Lily White's 1-0 at Wembley. UEFA Cup, 1983-84. Tottenham goalkeeper Tony Parks celebrates after his heroics in the 1984 UEFA Cup final second leg against Anderlecht at White Hart Lane. Tottenham manager Keith Birkinshaw decided to leave the club in the summer of 1984 following disagreements with the board. But his tenure ended on a high as Spurs beat Anderlecht on penalties after 1-1 draws in Brussels and at White Hart Lane in the UEFA Cup final. Reserve goalkeeper Tony Parks was the hero in the absence of the injured Ray Clements, saving the final penalty for Martin Orgoth-Johnson in the shootout. FA Cup, 1990-91. Tottenham players celebrate with the FA Cup after victory over Nottingham Forest in the 1991 final at Wembley. Tottenham's most recent FA Cup win came in 1991 as Terry Venable's side beat Nottingham Forest 2-1 at Wembley. Paul Gascoigne was stretchered out early on after a horror tackle on Gary Charles and Spurs were a goal down to a Stuart Pearce free kick at the break. Gary Lineker sought a penalty saved by Mark Crossley, but Tottenham went on to win thanks to a Paul Stewart strike and a Day Walker own goal in added time. It was the club's 8th FA Cup win. League Cup, 1998-99. Tottenham players line up ahead of the League Cup final against Leicester City at Wembley in March 1999. With former Arsenal manager George Graham in charge, Tottenham won a first trophy in 8 years by beating Leicester City in the 1999 League Cup final. Spurs and left-back Justin Edinburgh sent off in a dull match, but took the trophy thanks to Alan Nielsen's diving header in the 90th minute at Wembley. League Cup, 2007-08. Tottenham players celebrate their League Cup final win over Chelsea in February 2008. Juan Ramos did not last long at Tottenham, but the former Sevilla boss did lead Spurs to League Cup success during his time in North London. Didier Drogba gave Chelsea the lead in the final at Wembley in February 2008, but Dimitar Berbatov leveled with a penalty and recent signing Jonathan Woodgate won it with a header in extra time. Europa League, 2024-25. Tottenham lift the Europa League trophy after defeating Manchester United 1-0 in Bilbao, May 2025. If you'd have offered Tottenham fans the chance to celebrate winning a major trophy, almost every one of them would have gladly suffered with a 17th placed finish in the Premier League, which included 22 defeats and a slow unravelling of Ange Postecoglou's reign that saw the Australian part ways after 2 seasons. Curiously, Manchester United were in a similar position, suffering domestically, in need of a knockout pickup, and though the final was no classic, Spurs managed the game perfectly to book their place in the Champions League and end a long drought. Captain Son Heung-min became a legend instantly. Harry Kane left to win trophies, while Sonny stayed to deliver them. Ben Hayward is a European football writer and Tottenham Hotspur fan with over 15 years experience. He has covered games all over the world, including 3 World Cups, several Champions League finals, Euros, Copa America, and has spent much of that time in Spain. Ben speaks English and Spanish, currently dividing his time between Barcelona and London, covering all the big talking points of the weekend on FFT. He's also written several list features and interviewed Guglielmo Vicario for the magazine.